I hope you all have a wonderful Father's Day. However, like me, many of you will not. In this story you will find that the father may not be who his son thought him to be. Red Oak Hollow was a place that seemed to breathe. It inhaled the damp air from Lake Pontchartrain. The trees, ancient oaks mostly, dripped with Spanish moss. Houses here were old, with paint peeling like sunburned skin. They leaned a little, as if tired of standing straight for so many decades. The town was quiet. Too quiet sometimes. Children rarely played in the streets here. Red Oak Hollow wasn't a place people moved to. It was a place people were from, a place that held on to its own. It had secrets, tucked away in the shadowy corners of its overgrown gardens. Red Oak Hollow sat nestled near its edge, forever listening to its quiet, watery whispers. Thomas drove his sputtering old car down the familiar winding road. Each turn brought him closer to Red Oak Hollow, closer to the house he grew up in, closer to his father. He gripped the steering wheel tightly. His knuckles were white. Father's Day. The words felt like a heavy stone in his stomach. It was an obligation, a duty, not a celebration. Not for him, not with his father. The trees seemed to press in on the road, their branches like grasping fingers. The journey always felt longer than it was, as if the miles stretched themselves out, reluctant to let him arrive. Or perhaps it was he who was stretching the time, putting off the inevitable. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and something else. Something uniquely Red Oak Hollow. A smell that brought back a rush of uncomfortable memories. Memories of a childhood spent tiptoeing around unspoken tensions. He wished, not for the first time, that he could just turn the car around, drive away, keep driving. He hadn't wanted to come. He'd made excuses for years. But this year, his sister Clara had been insistent. So he had packed a small, overnight bag. And now, here he was, the old familiar dread coiling in his gut like a cold snake. His father, Arthur, was a man carved from stone and silence. Tall and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to see right through you. Or perhaps, see something just behind you that you couldn't. He rarely smiled. When he did, it was a fleeting, thin thing that never quite reached his eyes. It made Thomas feel colder than his usual frowns. Words were rationed in their household like precious commodities. Arthur preferred to communicate through disapproving glances or the sharp tap of his fingers on a tabletop. The house itself felt like an extension of his father. It was tidy, obsessively so, but it was a cold tidiness. Not a speck of dust was allowed to settle. Yet there was no warmth, no life. The furniture was old, dark, and heavy. The curtains were always partly drawn, keeping the rooms in a perpetual twilight. Even on the brightest days, sunlight struggled to penetrate the gloom. Thomas always felt like he had to whisper, even when his father wasn't in the room. The silence of the house had a weight to it. Growing up, Thomas had tried everything to earn a word of praise, a nod of approval. Nothing worked. This visit felt different almost immediately. As Thomas stepped inside, the old grandfather clock in the hall chimed. It was 3 o'clock. But the clock had been broken for years, stuck at 5:30. He stared at it. The pendulum was still. The hands pointed resolutely to their usual incorrect time. Yet he had heard it chime, clear as day. A shiver, cold and unwelcome, traced its way down his spine. He told himself he was tired from the drive, imagining things. Later, as he sat in the dim living room, the lights began to flicker, not just a single bulb, but all of them. The main overhead light, the small lamp on the side table. They pulsed, weakly at first, then more erratically. It was as if the house was struggling to breathe, its electrical lungs failing. His father, sitting in his usual armchair, reading a thick, leather-bound book, didn't even look up. He just turned a page, his expression unchanged. "Wiring's old," he grunted without making eye contact, but it felt like more than old wiring. Then came the sounds. Little sounds, a soft scratching from inside the walls like tiny claws. The shadows in the house seemed deeper that evening. They clung to the corners of rooms like dark cobwebs. They stretched and writhed in the periphery of his vision. Thomas found himself constantly looking over his shoulder. He felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. But whenever he turned, there was nothing there. Just the empty hallway. Just the silent, brooding furniture. Just the oppressive stillness of his father's home. It was a subtle torment, wearing him down. Once, heading towards the kitchen, he caught a glimpse of movement. A flicker of something dark at the far end of the hall. Taller than a man. Thinner. It was gone in an instant, like a trick of the light, or a figment of his tired imagination. He told himself it was just a shadow, a play of the flickering lights on the old wallpaper, but his heart hammered in his chest. The next morning, Father's Day, Thomas woke with a start. The house was too quiet. Not the usual oppressive quiet. This was an empty quiet. A hollow quiet. He lay in bed for a moment, listening. No sounds of his father moving about downstairs, no clinking of a teacup, no rustle of a newspaper, just nothing. A knot of unease tightened in his stomach. He got out of bed, the floorboards cold beneath his bare feet. He pulled on his clothes quickly. He went downstairs. The living room was empty. His father's armchair, usually occupied, was vacant. The thick leather-bound book lay open on the small table beside it, as if he had just stepped away for a moment. But the indentation on the cushion was cold. Thomas called out, "Dad!" His voice sounded small in the stillness. He checked the kitchen. Empty. The back door was locked. He checked his father's bedroom. The bed was neatly made, undisturbed. A sense of dread, cold and sharp, began to creep over him. There was no note, no sign of a struggle. No indication of where his father might have gone. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. The symbol on the rug was just the beginning. Driven by a growing sense of foreboding, Thomas began to search his father's study. It was a room he'd rarely entered as a child, always kept locked. Now the key was simply in the lock. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old paper, dust, and something else. A faint metallic tang. Bookshelves lined every wall, crammed with volumes Thomas had never seen before. Not novels or histories, but texts with strange titles in languages he didn't recognize, their covers bound in cracked leather and secured with tarnished clasps. He ran his fingers along their spines. Some felt strangely warm to the touch, others were icy cold. On his father's large oak desk, amidst scattered papers filled with spidery handwriting and more bizarre symbols, lay a single, tarnished silver locket. He picked it up. It was unexpectedly heavy. He tried to open it, but it was sealed shut. As he examined it, he noticed the same spiky circle symbol from the rug etched faintly onto its surface. His heart pounded. These were not the belongings of an ordinary, reclusive old man. Tucked beneath a loose floorboard, Thomas found it. A small, leather-bound journal. His father's handwriting, usually so precise and controlled, was hurried here, almost frantic in places. The dates spanned decades. He sat on the dusty floor, the strange energy of the room pressing in on him, and began to read. The words painted a picture so fantastical, so terrifying that he almost couldn't believe it. But the evidence was all around him, the books, the symbols, the oppressive atmosphere of the house. His father, Arthur, was not just a reclusive man, he was a guardian, a wizard, though the journal used older, stranger words for it. He had been fighting a battle, a secret war against something from outside, something that wanted in. The journal spoke of entities, of shadows that fed on fear, of attempts to breach the veil between worlds. Red Oak Hollow, it seemed, was a weak spot, a place where the fabric of reality was thin, and this house, their home, was a fortress. The flickering lights, the cold spots, the strange sounds, they weren't just the house settling, they were signs of the battle. The entity, as his father called it, was always pressing, always testing the defenses. Thomas closed the journal, his hands shaking. A wizard. His father, the cold, distant man he barely knew, had been a wizard, fighting a silent, lonely war to protect him, to protect this very house, this town. The weight of the revelation was immense, crushing. All those years of resentment, of feeling unloved, of misunderstanding, they dissolved, replaced by a horrifying clarity. His father hadn't been a wicked man, he had been a shield, a tired, embattled warrior, and now, that shield was gone. The house around him seemed to groan, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the floorboards. The lights flickered violently, then steadied, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed more menacing than before. He felt it then. A presence. The entity. It was aware of him. Aware that the old guardian was gone. The air grew colder, the metallic tang stronger. The faint whispers he'd heard earlier seemed to coalesce, forming indistinct words at the edge of his hearing. Words of hunger, words of invitation. He looked at the symbols on the floor, at the strange books lining the shelves. This was his legacy now, his inheritance, not money or property in the usual sense, but a battle, a curse.